Hello and welcome to a new video for Math UC Zeta. We are in lesson 20. We're going to talk about dividing a decimal number by a decimal number. So I've already taught this in person, and I'm going to be honest, my takeaway is that in some ways this is easier to understand than the two lessons before this where we were dividing decimals. And I'm happy about it, but I'm not exactly sure why that is. Okay, so if we look at this first thing, for instance, I actually, in class, I asked this question completely before looking at the note, saying something similar to this, that, okay, if you have 0.3, how many 0.3s fit into 1.2? Not everyone immediately got it, but I was surprised how many people got it. That this idea that we have 0.3, which is less than 1, it's a smaller part than 1, so like you'd imagine part of a pizza, part of a cookie, I don't know why it's always food, part of a dollar, you know, if we have this section, we're saying how many of those are inside of 1.2, then really it's the same question as how many 3s are there in 12. And so the answer to that is going to be 4. And that's, I think, in some ways easier to understand than the ones that we did, you know, a couple weeks ago, where we were first introduced to the idea of having to move the decimal. Now, that being said, some of these may be like that where you can kind of look at it and figure it out. But just in case, we need to be equipped with the correct method so that we can see through the ones that maybe aren't as obvious. So what we want to do here is we want to say, I don't want to divide by a decimal. Okay, that's just in general. We don't want to divide by a decimal. So what we do is we move the decimal on what we're dividing by, and then we have to move it the same amount on what we're dividing into. So that's why actually the question is the same as how many times does 3 go into 12, because I can essentially multiply this by 10 so that I've got a 3 instead, and multiply this by 10 so that I've got 12 instead, and then I can say how many times does 3 go into 12? And the answer to that is 4 times, and it goes in evenly. So that's a case where hopefully it makes sense why 0.3 goes into 1.2 4 times. But if the thing we're dividing by is actually bigger than the thing we're dividing into, then that kind of creates a complicatedness that we might have some struggles with that first. So let's look at this. 0.25 divided by 0.5. This is saying how many 0.5s are there in 0.25. And that's tricky because there aren't any 0.5s in 0.25s because 0.5 is bigger than 0.25, right? So the number answer we get is actually going to be a decimal because we can't put a whole 0.5 in 0.25. But we can put part of a 0.5 in 0.25. It's really weird, which is why I like that we have a method that makes it to where we don't even have to think about any of that. And that method is saying, okay, I don't want to divide by a decimal. So I want this to be 5, not 0.5. But in order to make it 5, I have to say how many places do I move the decimal to make that happen? I move it over once. So for the 0.25, I need to move over once as well, not twice, because I only moved it once for the 5. I only move it once for the 0.25, which turns it into 2.5. And then we do our division. We say 5 goes into 2 no times. So we could put a 0 up here and minus 0. We don't have to do that. We could just, you know, say, okay, now 5 into 25 goes 5 times. So our answer here is 0.5. And maybe you thought of that, or maybe now you're like, well, wait, how does that work? If we are trying to fit 0.5 into 0.25, it fits half of a time because think about it like quarters. If I have a quarter, right, and then I'm saying how many 50 cents will fit into a quarter, only half of that will actually fit, right? So it's weird, but that's kind of the reasoning behind it. And that's also the process behind it. Move the decimal so that you're not dividing by a decimal. Let's do a couple more, and these are probably going to seem pretty similar. The difference is going to be kind of like how many times we move the decimal. Some of these you may be able to come up with at least part of just by looking at the numbers. Like if you look at 36 and 12 and think, how many times does 12 go into 36? You may be able to come up with that answer. But then the question is, do you know automatically where the decimal should be? Or do you need to go back to our method of moving the decimal and actually dividing it out? I personally don't feel comfortable guessing at what the decimal is. And I'm pretty good at math, and especially mental math. So I'm going to recommend that you use the method to figure out where the decimal should be. So here we go. I don't want to divide by 0.012. I wouldn't mind dividing by 12. So then how many times did I have to move the decimal to turn 0.012 into 12? I have to move it 3 times, because if I move it once, it's here, twice is here, 3 times is right here. So if I move it 3 times to get it to be 12, I need to move it 3 times on this 0.36. But 0.36 only has 2 decimal places, so that third spot is going to need to have a 0 added to it. So the answer to this question, how many times does 0.012 go into 0.36, is the same as the question, how many times does 12 go into 360? So let's see, 12 goes into 36 3 times, and then doesn't go into 0, so we put a 0 up there. So the answer here is 30. Okay, just a reminder that we can actually check these. And so when we're checking these to see if they work out right, we would take what we started with, this 0.012, and we would times that by our answer, which is 30. So we don't times 12 by 30, although that will give us 360. If we say 0.012 and we times that by 30, that should give us the decimal we started with, 0.36. And so when we multiply by 0, those are all 0. We put a 0 placeholder, and then we multiply it by 3. We add our columns, and then we say there's 3 decimal places here, so 1, 2, 3, and we get 0.36. So yeah, looks like we did it right because we checked our answer and we got the thing that we started with. Let's look at this last one, 8.4 divided by 0.07. So 0.07 is a really small amount, right? Like that's like 7 cents, for instance. So we could think of this as how many sets of 7 cents would fit inside $8.40. That would be one way of thinking about it. And if you're thinking about it like that, there should be a lot of them, right? Because 7 cents is not very much. $8 isn't a huge amount, but it's a pretty good amount. And so however many times 7 fits into $1, well, we're actually going to figure out how many times it fits into $8.40. So our method, we don't want to divide by 0.07, we want to divide by 7. So if I move this over, so it's 7, that means moving it 2 places. And so that means I'm going to move for 8.4 2 places, which means I need to put a 0 at the end. And if you're working these out, I don't know how much stress I can put into this. If you're working these out and you're checking your answers and you have the right numbers, but your decimal's in the wrong spot, or you have too many zeros or not enough zeros, then your issue isn't the act of dividing, right? Where we like use multiplication tables to figure out how many times does it go in and that sort of thing. Your issue is with, what do I do with the decimal? And that's the thing that's new. So in some ways, that's a good thing that that's what you're struggling with. On the other hand, if you're struggling because your numbers are just completely wrong, well, that's where you need to go back maybe and just practice some normal division, work on your multiplication tables and that sort of thing. Or maybe it's just that you need to be more careful and work more slowly. Maybe you're going through it too fast because you're just trying to get it done. Okay, so all that to say, if you work out a problem and your decimal's not in the right spot or your zeros are not in the right spot, either watch this video again to try to figure out how to tell where the zeros and decimals are supposed to go, or ask a friend or family member, or I guess those are basically the 2 categories in our life. Don't ask a complete stranger for lots of reasons. But ask somebody to try to help you, or rewatch this video or a previous video about decimals so that you can figure out how does this whole decimal placement thing work. So let's do this. 7 into 840 goes 1 time with 1 left over. We drop down the 4. 7 goes into 14 2 times. and then I have 0. 7 doesn't go into 0, or it goes in 0 times. Make sure we put the 0 up on top. And so our answer here is 120. So again, we could check our answer by doing 120 times 0.07, and that should give us 8.4. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. We are nearing the end of talking about all the different parts of decimal division. We're getting close. I think we have one more. So get excited, I guess, for that, either because you like division or because it's almost over, whichever one it takes. Please make sure you're subscribed. Hit the like button to say, hey, I like that you did this video, or to say, hey, I like you, or to say, hey, there's a like button on YouTube. And I will see you in the next video.